I've been made to feel part of Scotland. Since I came here, you are made to feel that if you're here, you're Scottish, and that's good enough. And that's a big thing. The Gallery of Modern Art is like my favorite place in Edinburgh. It's at the same time conservative and classical, but also quite modern and bonkers. And I think it captures like the idiosyncrasy of Scotland. It has both the madness and the rational. It's the Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, both inhabiting the same space. I'm Portuguese born, and I live in Scotland since 2015. And yeah, I moved here for work, and most of all because I met Scottish people back in Portugal who told me that this was a brilliant country that needed young people, and that was like enough of me to go like, I'll give this a go. And then I just fell in love and found a job, and I've been here since, happily living in Scotland and becoming more Scottish by the day. There's this misconception that is very common across many Southern European countries, that people in Northern Europe are like colder, more demure. People were incredibly friendly from the get-go. The Scottish people will put you at ease quite quickly and just make you feel like you're not another talking to them. You're like one of them. In a way, they're very similar nations, Scotland and Portugal. We're both small Atlantic nations with big history related to fishing and the seas. And although, of course, very different contexts politically, we're both small nations with a big neighbor. There's a shared history also about the people and the struggles that people have faced related to emigration. Portugal has, for the last century alone, through military dictatorships first, and then fascist dictatorships, and all of that saw a whole load of people having to leave. So there's a lot of shared history in the good and in the bad. Both our countries are European nations with long European roots that are far stronger and older than any current political allegiances that we may think of. It hurts me to see like how damaging it is to see a country receding onto itself, not of its own volition, but because its most powerful neighbor has dictated that this is the path forward. And yeah, that's the most depressing aspect of it all. I wasn't in Scotland in 2014. I was still in Portugal saving money, hopefully to move abroad. But I've always been interested in politics, and of course the Scottish independence, the first referendum, was such a tumultuous time in terms of political history in Europe, because it was a new thing. It was a thing that could have important repercussions even for Portuguese neighbors like Spain and Catalonia. And as a history graduate myself, it was history being made. It was something completely new, a country democratically voting or rejecting the prospect of its independence. So I followed it from afar in 2014 without any emotional interest, just a rational outlook from the outside. And from the get-go, you have to take in mind that I was getting most of my information back in Portugal. What was reported came from British mainstream media, so something in me was suspicious of the picture that was being painted. And I could see that there was a narrative at play which didn't match the message, what I saw, the images of what I saw of the campaign on the grounds in terms of the Yes movement, which introduced me to the concept of civic nationalism. It was the first time I saw a nationalist movement, or so-called nationalist movement, that was so inclusive and was making a case that was hopeful. There was no scapegoating of migrants or of any other minority. It was just about what Scotland could be and the future that Scotland could have. And I was fascinated by that. It was incredible.
Can the Prime Minister be honest about the benefits of freedom of movement? and ensure that we retain those benefits.
One of the things they wanted to change was to bring an end to free movement and to ensure that it is the UK government that is able to make decisions about who can come to this country.
Cease to be members of the single market, and therefore free movement ends.
It may have been a very good thing for Scotland. I think it's been a disaster for the rest of the nation. And the reason that many people...
Freedom of movement has been an immeasurably good thing. It's been a good thing for people coming to live here, and it's been a good thing for our citizens who've been able to go and live and work in other EU countries.
The only voice of reason which was loud and which was vigorous and which was on the right side of the argument, from my view, was that of the SNP and Nicola Sturgeon. From the beginning of the Brexit referendum, I've always felt like the SNP and the Scottish people as an extension, because the SNP represent the Scottish people as the majority party at the time, they welcomed me, they valued the contribution of immigrants. They said that I was a New Scot before I even saw myself as a New Scot. I remember telling my dad, calling him and telling that I had just joined the Nationalist Party in a country where I wasn't born. Due to the whole Brexit and independence debate, I started putting my thoughts into words. Sometimes people who should have a voice have their voice denied by the media itself, which doesn't care to hear about it. And so it falls to us to create our spaces and our own mechanisms of raising our voices when possible. One of those ways that I found was creating my own blog, Braw Blether. It allows you to throw a different perspective that people born here don't have. And of course, there's many things that I don't know, so it's also a learning experience. Sometimes I may be screaming into the void, but it's my way of coping what's going on, rationalizing stuff, basically bring my perspective to Scottish affairs through the prism of my background in history. My initial blog was received with an awesome feedback, my love letters to Scotland. And from then on, I've just been motivated to basically bring my perspective. The Scotland that remains in the UK is a smaller Scotland, is an inward-looking Scotland, is a Scotland devoid of the potential that it has in Europe. But independence, above all, gives you the tools to solve your own problems rather than having to ask someone else's permission. And that, I think, is the greatest argument for Scottish independence. You don't have to delegate your powers when there's no one better to decide what's best for Scotland than the people who live in Scotland, born here or born elsewhere. Scotland stands for equality, Scotland stands for fairness, and the only way Scotland can do that is with independence. I will be voting yes.